Is this how my story ends? You must be asking yourself. Then let me give you the answer right now. No, you're not going to end in misery. Pain is not the final author of your story. The same God who carried you through past darkness is still walking beside you now, even when you cannot feel him clearly. One day, you will look back at this chapter and realize that what almost broke you also became the beginning of your healing. I am not just saying all this. I know this is the truth. Let me tell you a story. It was nearly midnight. Snow rested quietly on the empty parking lot outside a small grocery store somewhere in northern America. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above rows of abandoned shopping carts. Inside an old car, a man sat motionless with the engine off. His hands rested on the steering wheel. Not because he was ready to drive, but because he didn't know where else to go. For nearly 40 minutes, he stared through the windshield without seeing anything at all. No music, no phone, no conversation, just silence. The kind of silence that becomes dangerous when a person has carried sadness for too long. And maybe someone listening tonight understands that silence. The silence of emotional exhaustion. The silence after another disappointing day. The silence of smiling around people while secretly falling apart inside. This man's name was Daniel, and if you had seen him that night, you would never have guessed how much pain he carried. Daniel was the kind of person people described as good, reliable, quiet, hardworking, the type of man who held doors open for strangers and apologized even when things were not his fault. But depression often hides behind ordinary faces. For almost 2 years, Daniel had been slowly losing himself. It began after losing his job during a difficult season. Then came financial stress. Then isolation. Then the long winter months where darkness arrived before evening and stayed too long. Little by little, hope leaked out of him. He still believed in God, at least intellectually, but emotionally, God felt very far away. Prayer became shorter, then quieter, then almost non-existent. He stopped attending church regularly because pretending to be okay became exhausting. Whenever people asked how he was doing, he gave the same answer. Doing all right. But he wasn't all right. Not even close. The difficult thing about emotional pain is that it rarely announces itself loudly. A broken arm receives attention. A bleeding wound receives care, but invisible suffering often gets hidden behind routine. People go to work while emotionally drowning. They laugh at dinners while feeling numb inside. They scroll endlessly through their phones at night because silence forces them to face thoughts they are trying to escape. And slowly, many begin believing a terrible lie. If nobody notices my pain, maybe my life does not matter. But hidden pain still matters to God, even when nobody else sees it. And perhaps tonight, someone listening needs to hear this clearly. Heaven does not overlook exhausted people. God sees the tears nobody hears, the prayers nobody finishes, the nights nobody talks about. That night in the parking lot, Daniel had no plan. He simply did not want to go home yet. Home felt too quiet, too empty, too heavy. Snow tapped softly against the windshield while he sat there staring ahead. Then something unexpected happened. A knock, very soft. Daniel looked up. An older man wearing a winter jacket stood beside the car, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Daniel rolled down the window slightly. The old man smiled gently and said, "You looked like someone who shouldn't be alone tonight." Daniel almost laughed awkwardly, not because it was funny, but because nobody had said something that honest to him in a very long time. The old man handed him a coffee, then pointed toward the diner across the street. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" And strangely, Daniel said yes. Inside the diner, warm light filled the room. The smell of coffee and fried food drifted through the air. A waitress wiped tables in the background while quiet country music played overhead. The old man introduced himself as Samuel, and for a while they spoke about ordinary things. Weather, work, life. But eventually, Samuel looked directly at Daniel and asked something nobody had asked him honestly in months. "How tired are you really?" Not physically, emotionally, spiritually, deep down tired. And something inside Daniel broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like ice finally cracking after a long winter. For the next 20 minutes, words poured out of him. Fear, failure, loneliness, depression, the feeling that God had become distant, the terrifying exhaustion of pretending to be strong all the time. Samuel listened without interrupting, without preaching, without trying to immediately fix him. And sometimes that alone is holy, to be fully heard. When Daniel finally stopped talking, Samuel wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and said, "Can I tell you something strange?" Daniel nodded. Samuel smiled softly. "When I was younger, I worked on ships near the eastern coast. One winter, a storm knocked out power across an entire harbor town." He paused. The whole shoreline went dark except for one small lamp hanging outside an old church. Daniel listened quietly. Samuel continued, "Do you know what happened? Boats started navigating toward that tiny light, not because it was powerful, but because in complete darkness, even small light becomes precious." Then Samuel leaned forward slightly. "Son, depression convinces people they have no light left. But if you were truly empty, you wouldn't still be searching for hope." Silence filled the table, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt tears rise into his eyes. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because something inside him realized he wasn't completely abandoned. Many people expect healing to arrive dramatically, instant peace, instant joy, instant answers. But often, God rebuilds people slowly, very slowly. The next morning, Daniel still struggled. The next week still felt difficult. But something had changed. Not his circumstances, his direction. He began speaking honestly with people again. He returned to prayer even when the words felt weak. He started taking walks instead of isolating himself completely. Small steps, tiny lights. But small lights matter. Months later, Daniel found work again. Not perfect work, but meaningful work. He began helping at a local community outreach center. And strangely, the people most comforted by him were those carrying hidden pain themselves. Because wounded people often recognize wounded people. And sometimes the people who survive darkness become the safest place for others to heal. Maybe tonight you feel like Daniel sitting in that parking lot, emotionally drained, spiritually exhausted, secretly wondering whether life will ever feel bright again, please hear this carefully. Your current season is not your final story. You are not forgotten. You are not weak because you are struggling, and you do not need to pretend to be okay every second of the day. Sometimes courage looks like simply continuing to pray, continuing to breathe, continuing to believe that maybe, just maybe, light still exists beyond what you currently feel. And if your faith feels small tonight, that's all right. Even a tiny lamp can guide someone through darkness. One day, years later, Daniel would drive past that same grocery store parking lot during another winter evening. Snow falling softly again, lights glowing in the darkness again. But this time, he would not stop there in despair, because the place where he once believed his story was ending became the place where hope quietly returned. And perhaps your story is not ending either. Perhaps this painful chapter is only the middle, not the conclusion. If your heart feels heavy tonight, may peace find you gently. May tomorrow carry even the smallest light. And may you remember this: God often works quietly in the lives of tired people. Good night, and don't lose hope yet.